Hey, welcome. Today, we're going to try and cut through all the noise surrounding mental health. It feels like everywhere you look, psychological terms are being thrown around left and right. But what do they actually mean? Well, let's dive in and find out. And this quote, it really just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? The words we use about our own minds, they have so much power. And when we get them wrong, we're not just being a little sloppy. We can cause real harm. We create stigma and confusion right where we need clarity and compassion the most. So that leads us right into our first section, trying to navigate this mental health maze. Because right now, the public conversation about this stuff is louder and, honestly, more confusing than ever. It's just filled with these pop psychology sound bites that, a lot of the time, get things completely backward. Sound familiar? Yeah. I mean, these are the kinds of armchair diagnoses we hear all the time. Just scroll online for 5 minutes and you'll see these really serious clinical terms being used as casual insults or, and this is the weird part, as some kind of badge of honor. Being a little unconventional gets you labeled as mad, while real, actual suffering sometimes gets romanticized as a sign of depth. And look, this isn't just talk. This confusion has a real price. When crazy is just an insult you throw around, people with actual disorders are terrified to speak up. When a term like narcissist gets used for anyone who's a little bit selfish, it loses its clinical power. And in some circles, this can even create this bizarre situation, this moral inversion, where being fragile is seen as noble and sensitive, but being resilient is somehow cold or uncaring.
Okay, so how in the world do we find our way out of this maze? We need a reliable compass, right? Something to point us in the right direction. So in this next section, we're going to look at a super simple, expert-backed tool that professionals use to cut right through all that noise.
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we all have our little eccentricities, our unique ways of seeing the world, so where's the line? Where does a harmless personality trait end and something that might need clinical attention begin? And here it is. This is the answer. It all boils down to a two-part rule that the pros use. For something to be considered a clinical disorder, it has to cause significant, lasting suffering to the person. That's what they call distress. Or it has to get in the way of their ability to function in the big areas of life. Work, school, relationships. That's dysfunction. So you see, it's not about being different. It's about being disabled by your symptoms. This chart just lays it all out, side by side. On one side, you've got personal style, quirks, being a nonconformist, all the stuff that psychology actually thinks is pretty cool. But on the other side, you have a roadblock, a serious roadblock. If a pattern of thoughts or behaviors is actively stopping you from living your life, that's when you cross the line into a potential disorder. All right, so now that we have our distress and dysfunction compass, let's put it to work. Let's use it to debunk three of the biggest, most persistent myths you hear in pop psychology. Okay, first one up. This idea that being weird means you're unwell. The reality couldn't be clearer. Diagnostic manuals, the books clinicians actually use, explicitly say that just being socially different or not conforming is not a mental disorder, period. Unless that unusual behavior is causing you serious impairment or suffering, it's just a different way of being. It's not a pathology. Now, this next one, it's a little trickier. It's the myth that being highly sensitive is automatically a strength. The research actually shows it's more like a high-gain amplifier. It cranks up the volume on everything, both the beautiful stuff and the painful stuff. So without really strong emotional regulation skills to manage all that intensity, high sensitivity can become a serious risk factor for anxiety and depression. Real strength comes from learning how to manage that sensitivity, not just from having it. And finally, there's this romantic idea that suffering makes you deep or profound. The data tells a completely different and frankly much starker story. Chronic untreated depression is linked to some really serious negative outcomes, like actual shrinkage in parts of the brain that handle memory. It can even double your risk for dementia later in life. Emotional pain needs our compassion, and it needs effective treatment. It absolutely does not need to be romanticized. Okay, we've torn down the myths, so now let's pivot and build something up. What does genuine mental wellness actually look like? Because it isn't just about not being sick, it's about the presence of something positive, something vital. This model right here, it's a total game changer. It shows that mental illness and mental well-being are two totally separate things. You can have a diagnosis, say like bipolar disorder, but with the right support and skills,
you can still be in that top left box, flourishing. And on the flip side, you can have no diagnosis at all, but feel totally empty and stuck. That's the bottom right box, languishing. This completely reframes how we think about what it means to be healthy. So how do we move toward that flourishing box? Well, the research points to these 4 trainable skills. The ability to manage your emotions, to check your thoughts against what's actually happening, to find a sense of meaning and purpose in your life, and to build strong connections with other people. These are the fundamental pillars of psychological health and resilience.
This is all fantastic in theory, right? But how does it apply to you, to your own life? Let's try to distill everything we've talked about into a simple, practical test you can use to make sense of your own experiences. First things first, it really helps to know these 3 categories. A trait is a stable, long-term part of your personality, like being an introvert. A state is just a temporary reaction to something, like feeling super nervous before a big exam. And a disorder is a persistent, impairing pattern. Just being able to tell these 3 apart is a huge first step. And that brings us to the litmus test itself. You just have to ask yourself 3 simple questions. Number 1, impact. Is this hurting my daily life, my work, my sleep, my relationships? 2, distress. Is it causing me lasting suffering that I just can't seem to shake? And 3, duration. Has this been going on for weeks or maybe even months? Now, if you're answering yes to 2 or more of those, that's a really strong signal that it might be time to talk to a professional. This isn't a diagnosis, of course, but it's a very reliable guide.
Let's just end with this thought from Socrates. This whole journey, this quest for clarity about our own minds, it's not just some academic game. It's a deep, fundamental human need to understand ourselves truthfully. By cutting through the myths, by using a clear and compassionate framework, we get a little bit closer to that truth, and hopefully to a world that supports genuine mental flourishing for absolutely everyone.